Class, I'd like to welcome Vijay Mayadas today. He is going to be talking to you about blockchain in the fintech space. Vijay, welcome to the group. And we'd like you to share with us, where do you work, what do you do, and how do you use blockchain?
Great, thank you. My name is Vijay Mayadas. I work at a company called Broadridge Financial Solutions. We're one of the largest global fintech companies, about a market cap of $10.5 billion. And we're one of the largest investors in blockchain. We have a range of businesses across all aspects of financial services, capital markets, wealth management, asset management, where we provide complex software solutions to help large global clients meet their needs. So that's what we do in a nutshell. We've been investing in blockchain now for over 2 years. We have a center of excellence of over 30 people. We've been early investors in startups like Digital Asset. We are investing significantly in developing a blockchain platform for our proxy business. We've also made investments in the securities processing space. So, overall, we're big believers in the technology. We think that it's a highly transformative technology, which will take quite a lot of time, to play out, and will certainly affect different parts of our industry, at different times. But it's very important for us as a technology company to be a leader in blockchain.
Well, it sounds like you have a hand in every important pot that needs to be that needs a hand in it. So, in the simplest of terms, for some of our students that don't have a technology background, what is blockchain in your own words?
So you can think of it high level as a shared ledger, right? So it's a ledger of transactions which is distributed or shared, and through really three things, right? So distributed computing, cryptography, and game theory. Through these three things, you're able to maintain an immutable record of the ledger. So a record that everyone agrees with, a record that can't be tampered with, and a record that's synchronized in real time. So you can think of blockchain resulting from these three trends, which have been going on for decades, right? Obviously, game theory, distributed computing, which has evolved over time, and then the maturation of cryptography. And when you bring all those things together and you put it on a high-performance computing platform, then you can create a technology like blockchain. So that's high-level what it is. You then get into kind of different definitions, right, depending on what you're solving for. So again, at a very high level, you can think of blockchain as really doing two things. At least this is the way we think about it at Broadridge. On the one hand, it's a way to generate trust between untrusted actors on an untrusted network, right? And you could argue that that's the most powerful use case of blockchain, and probably the best example of that would be a cryptocurrency. Again, Bitcoin being the best example of that. On the other hand, you can think of blockchain as a distributed ledger, and the benefits of it when it's being used in that scenario are that it can dramatically simplify a bunch of operational processes, reconciliation, data exchanges, synchronization of databases. You can essentially collapse all of that workflow onto a single blockchain platform. So when we invest in blockchain as Broadridge, we're mainly focused on that second type of use case. So it's really using the technology to drive operational efficiency, simplification, cleaner, architecture, as opposed to the sort of Bitcoin type use case, which is kind of about creating ways for untrusted actors to exchange trust on an untrusted network, which we do believe is probably the most profound use case of blockchain, but it's not an area we're investing in right now.
So it sounds like your biggest benefit is creating greater efficiencies in the fintech space. Is that correct?
Yes, in the beginning, that's right. And the idea there is that, the investment banking industry or the capital markets industry has been under a lot of cost pressure since the financial crisis. So, if you look at the return on equity of a large global investment bank, obviously that's a measure a lot of shareholders use to measure how well the business is performing. Return on equity has not reached the cost of capital for a lot of banks 10 years after the financial crisis. And banks have been investing a lot in changing their technology platforms, changing their operating model. And they've done a lot in-house. But what they're looking for in terms of next generation technology like blockchain is for that to drive kind of what we call a step change in operational improvement. And that's the area which we are focused on the most.
So it sounds like for fintech, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like fintech using blockchain is a money saver more than a money maker.
I'd say it's a little bit of both. I would say that the near-term pressure a lot of our clients are under means that they have a lot of appetite to understand how the technology can be used to solve their own operational efficiency issues. Now, for us, obviously, that would be a product. So we would obviously, sell that product to them, but they would use the technology internally to drive operational efficiencies. So it's a money maker for us, and it's obviously a product for our clients.
So within the financial industry, who would you say are going to be the winners in the blockchain space, and who are going to be the losers in the industry if people don't learn how to use it?
So, there's a lot of talk in the industry about blockchain being a highly kind of disintermediating technology. I think it's less true, certainly in the world we operate in, right? So in the world of capital markets, where you have trillions of dollars of securities being traded every day, where you need huge amounts of liquidity, the current infrastructure actually works pretty well. It's pretty efficient. And blockchain is probably going to have less of an impact on the world of kind of institutional capital markets, if you will. And it'll probably be used more on the margins to solve for specific issues around wanting to drive operational efficiencies in certain areas. So give you a very specific example. In fixed income, so the business I run at Broadridge now is our fixed income business. And we have, about 60% of the US market. We process about, $5 trillion a day of fixed income transactions. And we announced a pilot a couple of weeks back where we focused on a specific process of the repo market, which we felt could be optimized using blockchain. And we announced this pilot with a couple of our firms. But that's the sort of use case which is gaining a lot of traction in our industry. It's not really disintermediating anyone. It's not too disruptive. It's more, an improvement, a real improvement in operational inefficiencies.
So I did my homework before the interview, and I have the repo article, and I highlighted some of the benefits that were in the article, and the ones that popped out for me were streamlining, faster, accurate, eliminating manual intervention, reducing counterparty risk, increasing auditability, and it seems like it's going to tighten up the repo transactions.
Yeah, we believe it had. This was an early stage pilot. We worked on real processes with real client data, and we saw real benefits. Now the question is, how well does blockchain scale? So a lot of people, what are some of the risks of using blockchain? One of the risks right now is that the technology still needs to be stress tested. There's still questions about how quickly can it scale and how robust it is. As I mentioned, in our world of institutional capital markets, you have extremely resilient, highly robust networks to process all the transactions which are getting traded every day. And one of the challenges about introducing an innovation like blockchain into that ecosystem is that it introduces a lot of kind of unintended consequences and risk. So there's still going to be quite a lot of time before I think blockchain can demonstrate its viability at that level of scale. That being said, we're very optimistic that it will scale, and the performance issues are being solved very quickly. And like most nascent technologies, it's going through, an early phase where, it's being tested now in production use cases. And at some point, it'll be ready to move into solving some of the, bigger challenges in the industry.
So to take a little fork in the road on the questions here regarding the risk, could you walk us through a scenario that you're afraid might happen, like where you're losing sleep, like, oh God, I hope it doesn't do this? Is there some sort of Achilles heel risk scenario that is in the back of your mind?
I think one potential thing I would sort of lose sleep over would be if, we prove blockchain in a lab environment, we test it a lot, and then we roll it out into a production environment, and it just hasn't been tested to the level that the current technology has been tested to. I mean, the current technology has been around for decades. It's obviously been improved, and there's been a lot of innovation, but it's been stress tested over a really long period of time under a whole bunch of different market scenarios. So the risk for us, at least in the industry we operate in, is that despite all the testing we could do around blockchain, that you never really know until you actually launch, a blockchain platform. And it's really impossible to model, well, I never say impossible, but it's very challenging to model all the kind of history which has driven the improvement of the current infrastructure and platforms we work with. So that would always be the biggest kind of wild card for me.
So one of the things that we do seem to be seeing in some of the literature is that blockchain might be slow, that it might have trouble. I believe today, correct me if I'm wrong, since the technology is moving so fast, that blockchain couldn't be used to do the transactions for Visa. There's just too many transactions right now. Blockchain couldn't keep up with that. Is that actually still an accurate statement?
Look, I think that a lot of the halo around blockchain sort of being slow, a lot of that comes from, I think, perhaps Bitcoin, right? And now in Bitcoin, you're solving a really complicated problem, right? So you are trying to validate, you're trying to create trust between untrusted actors on an untrusted network. And you're trying to do that in real time. And that is extremely computationally intensive. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of the algorithms behind, cryptocurrencies or open cryptocurrencies, a lot of the performance issues are a result of those types of algorithms, which need to be there. They need to do their thing for the whole, network to work and for people to feel comfortable exchanging value. When you start to have trusted actors use blockchain and you solve for the trust aspect before they're on the chain, that can dramatically increase the performance by multiple orders of magnitude. And, in the capital markets world, our assumption is that at least in the near term, most blockchains will be private blockchains, and you'll have solved for the trust issue before the entity's on the chain through some sort of onboarding process.
Gotcha. So if I'm doing repos with Goldman, 10 million every day, buying, selling back and forth, and I've had a 10-year relationship with you, I don't have to verify everything you're doing because we're like you say, a private blockchain. We don't have to solve the math problem.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Again, to do a large level question, how do you see the world of finance changing in your arena, let's say 10, 20 years from now? Like looking into the future with the crystal ball, if everything goes great, what good things can we expect from blockchain?
I think it'll start to be used in certain asset classes where, like the workflow is really complicated today, right? A lot of people talk about syndicated loans or OTC derivatives. I think with all the steps in the workflow, I think blockchain can really drive a pretty meaningful improvement. Now, you do have to bet on upfront behavioral changes taking place. So a lot of the enrichment that goes on during this workflow, can be solved up front. But I think in areas like OTC derivatives and other complex asset classes, we'll start to see blockchain play more and more a prominent role over the next 5 to 10 years. I think another area of blockchain, a lot of it, very exciting area for blockchain is the ability to bring liquidity into illiquid asset classes. And I think what's happening in private equity right now, where you're able to create private equity share tokenized on the blockchain and create the kind of marketplace around the blockchain, I think over time that will be a really powerful use case. And you can think about putting more and more types of illiquid assets on the blockchain. So I'd say in asset classes with complex workflows and in asset classes where there isn't much liquidity because of the complexity of managing the asset and the trading and the workflow around it, I think blockchain could be quite powerful.
So for example, one of our examples that we teach in class is the blockchain used to get blood diamonds out of the supply. We had a student from Sotheby's, and she was trying to figure out how would you use it in my industry. And I said, if you could verify provenance of a Van Gogh, instead of you'd be able to forget about the counterfeiting part, and you might not really need Sotheby's to do the verification if you could actually verify that the Van Gogh really is a Van Gogh. And that comes to my next question, is there going to be a huge benefit to consumers that their middleman costs, the trust people that they pay money to verify things, might be going away or being minimized?
Yeah, I think I certainly looked to Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies to kind of validate that idea that blockchain could be really beneficial to the end consumer by minimizing kind of, let's say, payment transaction costs, right? I think if Bitcoin really sort of takes off and is widely adopted, and the Bitcoin community finds ways to lower the transaction fees for Bitcoin, then I think it could get quite interesting for consumers in terms of their ability to send payments to anyone globally, right? I think Ripple is a very interesting example in terms of what they've been doing to use the Bitcoin blockchain to facilitate international payments. I think that's a great example of simplifying the number of steps it takes to move money from, let's say, my apartment in New York to my parents' home in London. Right now I can probably send a chair over to London more quickly than I can send an interbank payment. Which takes a couple of days today. So the fact that you could do this in a couple of minutes using some sort of Bitcoin blockchain, I think is really exciting. And I also feel it's going to be one area to watch is going to be the emerging markets, particularly markets like India and other markets, which have the opportunity to kind of leapfrog, traditional ways of exchanging payments by using, cryptocurrency. So I'm potentially, it's very excited to see a lot more activity there. The other interesting area as well for consumers, and this is a little bit more linked to our world, we're more of a kind of institutional fintech company. But in a lot of markets in Asia, Australia probably being the best example, the market infrastructure is a lot more centralized, right? So in Australia, the exchange, has every kind of record of everyone who owns any stock, right? And because of that simpler market structure, it's going to be much easier for them to drive adoption of this new technology, which in turn could have knock-on effects to end investors and retail investors in the Australian market, right? In terms of lower transaction costs, simpler record keeping, simpler reporting, and so on.
It's funny you talk about Australia. When I was researching for my next question, how would you profit from blockchain, I looked at all the stocks that were available to invest in. There's not that many. Well, there's yours. Thank you for the 10% return the last few months. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
That's very exciting. There's IBM, which only has a little dibble in it, so nothing's happened with that. There's the NASDAQ. But a lot of the other companies that I saw, I'm challenged with buying them because they're on the Australian exchange. And there's a real estate company selling bricks where you can sell a little piece of your home, 1/10,000th of it. It's almost like getting a home equity loan when you can sell a piece of it. And they're from Australia. And I'm wondering, is Australia as a country ahead of the US in blockchain? Or am I just stumbling on a random event?
I think in certain areas it may be. Part of one of the challenges with the US markets in terms of rolling out blockchain is they're really, really complex, right? So when you think about, for example, the equities market, right? So I'm sure you own shares. Those shares would typically be held by a broker-dealer, right? And there needs to be some reconciliation. I don't want to get too into details here, but there's a reconciliation that goes on between, the broker-dealer who owns, these shares in aggregate, the DTCC, where the broker-dealer has an account, and you, the retail investor. So there's quite a lot of hopping points in the US around trading shares and around reconciling shares and so on. In Australia, it's because it's a much smaller market, that ecosystem is a lot simpler. So I think, in the US, I'd say that certainly the pace of innovation and the focus on blockchain is, really high, which is fantastic. I just think it'll take longer in some areas, probably capital markets being a good example, compared to other markets because of how complex and large the infrastructure is here in the US.
Okay. So for the students in our class, some of them are at inflection points in their career or just beginning their careers, and they're single, don't have kids, they could move on a dime. If students wanted to position themselves career-wise in blockchain, are there specific job positions or industries that you would point them in the direction of so they could maximize their income off of this?
Yeah, look, I think one thing I think it's really important if you're thinking about a career in blockchain is to get extremely hands-on with the technology. So, when I first sort of came across Bitcoin, let's say, 4 years ago, I was so intrigued about how you could create this trust in an untrusted network with untrusted actors that I sort of went really deep into looking at the code and so on to really make sure I understood the concepts around blockchain. Because I think a lot of the concepts are quite new. The phenomena around untrusted actors being able to transact is something that emerges from these three things I talked about earlier. distributed computing, cryptography, and game theory. So to really deeply understand how that emerges from those underlying disciplines, I think is really important for anyone who wants to sort of build a career in blockchain. Bitcoin's a great example because it's obviously open source, so you can get access to very detailed white papers on it. Ethereum's another great example. You can kind of actually download stuff and play around with the technology. I found personally that facile kind of experimentation really deepened my understanding of what the technology can do and what it can't do. So I'd probably say that's step one. And if that's a little bit too hairy, kind of getting in the weeds, then the Khan Academy I found very useful in terms of some really simple videos explaining kind of the basic concepts.
The Khan
KhanAcademy.org, yeah, really interesting place to learn about new things like blockchain. And then in terms of industries which are going to use blockchain more and more over time, obviously financial services is a natural place, right? And then you can think about retail financial services and institutional financial services. I think there's going to be a lot of investment and activity in blockchain technologies in their industry, in those industries. And then there's, applying blockchain in areas we can't even conceive of today, right? You mentioned the blood diamond, use case. So the idea that you can use a blockchain to kind of track the provenance of, high value, highly illiquid asset classes, if you have the risk tolerance to be an entrepreneur, then maybe figuring out how to apply blockchain in those areas could be really interesting, right? So I think you could sort of go down a more traditional career path as a technologist or a business person with deep technology understanding in financial services. Healthcare is probably another arena where blockchain could be used, or you could think more entrepreneurially about it and start to apply the technology in existing markets to solve for pain points around knowledge of who owns what and liquidity.
Yes, one of my thoughts, I coach students on social entrepreneurship, and one of my easier thoughts was helping refugees. When we had the hurricane in Puerto Rico, some of the people from Puerto Rico have moved to Florida, teachers with 15, 20 years of experience who are now teachers' aides because their paperwork that said that they're actually a teacher was lost. And I thought, if all their records have been put on the blockchain, including Syrian refugees, so many of them have PhDs, but they can't prove it. If all those records have been put on the blockchain since birth, which now we could do, that would be such a cheap way to say, I'm a human being and here are my certificates. And it wouldn't be very expensive either.
Yeah, I agreed. And, I think that when I think about sort of the one, you sort of I think you sort of asked me the question in the beginning, what's the one question, we should ask about blockchain, right? So I would say, is it as fundamental a technology as, say, the internet protocol was, right? Because at Broadridge, we spent a lot of time thinking about that specific question, because when you put it in the same bucket as something as fundamental as, let's say, TCP/IP or packet switching or the internet protocol, the way you think about it is very different versus if you put it in the bucket of, this is another distributed database type of technology, right? So we put it in the former bucket, and we may be wrong, we may be right, only time will tell. But if you believe it's that deep in terms of what it can do, then, the new ideas and new things you could do with it are really, really tremendous, And so I think that's where a lot of the exciting opportunity is. And I think, today sitting here, being very in the weeds on blockchain and being very close to a lot of use cases and a lot of what's going in the market, I will say that it'll be the stuff that'll come out in the next 10 to 20 years. Perhaps we can't even conceive of that stuff today.
And for the people who are just the standard human beings just don't like change, what would you say to the person who's saying, I'm making plenty of money now, everything's great, I don't need to learn this new stuff? Why should they learn about blockchain now? What risks do people take by not becoming aware of the technology?
So if you do believe it's a fundamental innovation, then it has the potential to affect a really broad swathe of industries, right? So particularly if you're in financial services, that's going to be an industry I think blockchain is going to have an impact on, and be quite transformative over the next 10 or 20 years. But any other industry which requires some form of tracking, some complex workflow, some level of auditability in the activities of that industry. And in my mind, that probably encompasses most industries, right? blockchain is likely to have an impact at some point in the next, 10 to 20 years.
That leads me to my next question, and this is just going to be a little fun guessing game between us. In your industry, where do you think regular people, just the regular man and woman on the street, is going to see blockchain impacting their lives? Where do you think some of the first touch points are going to be in the financial sector?
I think it's probably going to be cryptocurrency. So you're already seeing that with the with the price of Bitcoin and Coinbase, and the amount of downloads Coinbase, I'm sure, is getting as a result of the price increase of Bitcoin, and the fact that so many of my friends who aren't really technical and haven't been into blockchain are starting to ask me a lot of questions about Bitcoin. So I think that's probably the first touch point.
Excellent. And I want to be mindful of your time. I could talk to you all day, but I said a half an hour, so I'm going to stick to that. My last question: what's a great question I didn't ask that people really should know about?
So I think it's that question around, how fundamental do you think blockchain is? Do you think it's like the internet protocol? Because I think if you believe it is, then the way you think about it, I think, is very different versus, is it just is it just another type of database?
Excellent. Vijay, thank you so much for being generous with your time. I'm sure our students really appreciate it. And we'll send you a copy of this. Please use it as you wish. And thank you again for the generosity of your time.
Michael, it was a pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.